John Carter, CEO of a leading tech company, stood at the window of his office, looking down at the city below. The morning sun bathed the skyline in a warm, golden glow, but to him, it all felt distant. The rush of the busy streets, the cars honking, the chatter of people walking by, it all seemed so far away. He had spent his entire life building his empire, and for the most part, he had succeeded. At the age of 42, he was known as one of the most powerful men in business. Yet, despite all his success, there was one thing he couldn't control. He was about to learn something that would shake him to his core. The phone call had come just a few hours ago. It was from his doctor, Dr. Anderson. They'd scheduled a routine checkup, something he'd been putting off for weeks. There was no real reason for the call to feel important. But it did. Something in the doctor's voice had hinted at an urgency he couldn't quite ignore. When John arrived at the clinic, the sterile white walls and cold, clinical environment only heightened the unease building in his chest. He had always been the picture of health. He was disciplined about his workouts, maintained a balanced diet, and rarely got sick. But today, the dread that gnawed at him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Dr. Anderson had asked him to sit down. His usual calm demeanor was gone. He looked up from his clipboard, locking eyes with John, and John immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a routine checkup. "I've reviewed your tests," Dr. Anderson said, his voice steady but not without a trace of concern. "And I'm afraid I have some difficult news." John swallowed hard. "What is it?" "It's a condition called asthenospermia," Dr. Anderson said, as he slowly leaned back in his chair. John felt the room go quiet. It was like the words hung in the air, unable to escape. The world around him seemed to freeze for a moment. His heart began to race as he tried to process what the doctor had just said. "Asthenospermia?" John repeated, his voice hollow. Dr. Anderson nodded. "It's a condition where sperm motility is impaired. Essentially, your sperm have difficulty moving properly. This could affect your ability to father children naturally." The words felt like a punch to the gut. John's mind raced. His life, his future, everything he had worked for, everything he thought he could control, seemed to be slipping away. How could this happen? He had always been so careful, so in control. He was a man who understood the importance of his health, who dedicated himself to every aspect of his life. And yet, this? He had never seen it coming. The doctor continued speaking, but John didn't hear most of it. His thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of it all. He had always imagined that he would have children one day, he wasn't sure when, but he had never doubted it. He thought he had time. But now? This diagnosis had turned his world upside down. The doctor's words came in a blur. "There are treatments, but there's no guarantee." John tried to focus, but it was like his mind refused to cooperate. He heard the doctor's voice fade away as he stood up from his chair, the sensation of vertigo beginning to take over. It wasn't real. This couldn't be real. He had to leave. He had to get out of there. Without saying another word, John walked out of the office, his legs unsteady beneath him. The doctor's voice calling after him faded into the background. His heart was still pounding, his mind spinning. He reached his car, almost automatically, and got in. His hands gripped the steering wheel, but he barely registered it. His mind was elsewhere, trying to hold on to something that felt real, that felt like it could still make sense. But nothing made sense. Nothing at all. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur. He didn't even know how he got there, but suddenly, he was standing in the doorway of his apartment. He stepped inside, trying to take a deep breath. But the air felt thick, suffocating. His mind was a storm of confusion and fear. His body felt disconnected from him, like he was going through the motions of life but not truly living it. He dropped his keys on the counter and walked into the kitchen. He needed something to calm him down, something to hold on to. His hands reached for a bottle of whiskey on the shelf, his fingers trembling as he unscrewed the cap. The liquid poured into his glass with a sharp sound, the dark amber liquid swishing inside the crystal. John sat at the kitchen table, the glass of whiskey in front of him. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. He looked tired, older than he felt. But his mind refused to rest. He couldn't stop thinking about what the doctor had said. How could it be true? How could he, of all people, be dealing with something like this? He had always been the one to take charge, to tackle problems head-on. But now, he was faced with something he couldn't control, something that felt utterly out of his hands. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that there were treatments, that there were options. But even as he thought that, the reality of it settled in deeper. There was no cure. There was no quick fix. This was his new reality, and he didn't know how to accept it. But even as he sat there, consumed by the enormity of what he had just learned, something else nagged at him. Something he couldn't explain. There was more to this. There had to be. John had never been a man to accept things at face value. He had always prided himself on understanding the full picture, on digging deeper. But this? This diagnosis? It didn't add up. It didn't fit. He had never been one for superstition or far-fetched ideas, but as he sat in that cold, empty kitchen, something about the situation felt off. There was a feeling deep in his gut, something gnawing at him, telling him that this wasn't just about a medical condition. It was something more. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. It was an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, he answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was soft but urgent. Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but I need to speak to you. It's about your condition. John's heart skipped a beat. Who is this? He demanded. The voice hesitated. I can't say much over the phone. But what I know will change everything you think you know about your situation. Meet me at the old warehouse on 6th Avenue tonight. 9 p.m. And bring your questions. Before John could respond, the line went dead. His heart raced. The call felt strange, too strange. But the sense of curiosity, the feeling that something much bigger was at play here, urged him to take action. He wasn't sure if it was the whiskey or the overwhelming desire to understand, but he found himself grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. He had to know what this woman knew. He had to know the truth. As John made his way through the dark streets of the city later that night, the weight of what had happened earlier in the day sat heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something he didn't understand, something he couldn't control. His thoughts kept circling back to the diagnosis, asthenospermia. But now, with the call he had received, it felt like there was something more. Something bigger. The old warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows and rusted exterior giving it an eerie presence in the dimly lit street. The air was thick with tension as John approached the entrance. He looked around, making sure he was alone, before stepping inside. The warehouse smelled of dust and neglect, the wooden floor creaking under his weight. He scanned the room, searching for the mysterious woman. But there was no sign of her. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was her. She was tall, with dark hair that fell in waves around her face. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. And for a moment, John felt like he was staring into the face of someone who knew secrets, secrets that could destroy him. You came, she said, her voice low and steady. I knew you would. Who are you? John asked, his voice trembling slightly. She smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was almost knowing, like she understood something he didn't. I'm someone who knows more about your condition than you could ever imagine. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring him to ask the one question that he didn't want to ask. But he had to. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You're not the only one with secrets. And the truth, well, it's not what you think." John's heart raced. This wasn't just about a medical condition anymore. This was something much bigger. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what was coming next. The woman's next words would unravel everything he thought he knew. And it was only just beginning. The woman stood before John, her presence commanding the room, and yet there was something unsettling about her. John's heart raced as he tried to keep his composure. She had just told him she knew more about his condition than he could ever imagine. Her words echoed in his mind, but he was desperate to make sense of them. "Who are you?" John asked again, his voice firm despite the unease settling in his chest. He needed answers, and he needed them now. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Her dark eyes were calculating, as if she were deciding whether or not to reveal something too dangerous to know. "My name is Sarah," she finally said, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "But that's not important right now. What matters is why you're here and what you need to understand." John's mind was still reeling from the shock of the diagnosis, and now, with this stranger standing before him, everything felt surreal. The world outside the warehouse seemed miles away, like it didn't belong to him anymore. There was only the strange woman in front of him and the questions that swirled in his mind. "Why did you call me?" John pressed, trying to steady his breath. "How do you know about my condition? What is going on?" Sarah took a step closer, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floor. She wasn't in a hurry. She had all the time in the world, and that fact only made John feel more anxious. "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to an old, creaky chair beside a small wooden table. Reluctantly, John complied. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but curiosity held him in place. The mystery of it all was like a magnet pulling him closer to the truth, even though he had no idea what that truth might be. Sarah pulled out a chair across from him and sat down slowly, her gaze never leaving him. "I know about your condition, John, because it's not just a medical problem. It's much bigger than that. You're not the only one who has suffered from it." John blinked, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean? You're saying there are others, other men like me?" Sarah nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Yes. And there's something you don't know about yourself. Something you need to learn if you're going to understand what's really happening." John leaned forward, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "You were chosen, John. Your condition is not a random diagnosis. It's part of a larger plan. A plan that involves you, your legacy, and a future that is not what you think it is." John's heart skipped a beat. "A plan? What kind of plan? This doesn't make any sense." "Of course, it doesn't," Sarah replied. Almost mockingly. "It's not supposed to make sense to you yet. You're in the middle of something far bigger than you realize. The truth is, your diagnosis is only the beginning of a much larger story." John shook his head. "This couldn't be real. I don't know what you're talking about. How could a condition like asthenospermia be part of a plan? And what does it have to do with me?" Sarah's eyes darkened, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of something dangerous in her gaze. "You've been living in the dark, John. Your condition was engineered, not by chance, but by design. Someone has been watching you. Someone with power, resources, and an agenda." John's mind raced. He didn't understand any of this. The room seemed to spin around him. He thought he knew the world he lived in: business, success, control. But this? This was beyond anything he could comprehend. "Who's behind this?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Who did this to me? Sarah's gaze softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost sympathetic. You need to understand something. This is bigger than just you. There are forces at play that have been manipulating events for years. You were always meant to be part of this, John. Your condition? It's just a piece of the puzzle. John stared at her in disbelief. He could feel his pulse quicken as panic began to rise in his chest. What does this have to do with my legacy? My family? I've spent my whole life working to build something I can pass on, and now, this? You can still have a legacy, Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. But it won't be the one you think it is. Your future is already mapped out for you. It's not just about bloodline or family. It's about something far more significant. John's mind was spinning. He felt like he was drowning in information he couldn't process. The diagnosis had felt like a blow, but this? This was something else entirely. His life, his purpose, his identity, they were all being called into question. And worse, he didn't know if he could trust Sarah. She seemed to know too much, but he didn't understand how. Tell me what you mean, John demanded, desperate for clarity. What is this all about? Why is this happening to me? Sarah's face hardened. She leaned forward, her voice low and serious. The truth is, John, you were never meant to have children in the traditional way. The condition you have? It was engineered to make sure you couldn't father children the way most men do. But that doesn't mean you won't have children. It just means they won't come the way you expect. John's breath caught in his throat. His mind was racing, trying to catch up to the bizarre revelation. What do you mean? Are you saying I won't be able to have children at all? Sarah shook her head. No, you'll have children. But not in the way you think. There are forces in play here, forces that want to use your legacy, your bloodline, for something far greater than just a family. They're using you, John. You're a pawn in a game you don't even understand yet. John's head swirled with a million questions. What kind of game? What are you talking about? Sarah sighed, looking at him with pity. You've been chosen because of who you are, because of your bloodline, your genetics, your position in the world. They've been watching you for years. You've been set up to play a role in something much larger than yourself. And now that your condition has been triggered, it's time for you to take your place. John felt a chill run down his spine. He had always believed he was in control of his own destiny, that his hard work and ambition were what defined him. But now, with Sarah's words, it felt like his life had been determined for him long before he'd even been born. He wasn't just part of a plan, he was the plan. What do you want from me? John asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. What do you want me to do? Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. You don't have to do anything just yet. But you will. Soon, you'll understand your role. The truth will be revealed, and you'll be faced with choices that will change everything. For now, I'm here to make sure you're prepared. John's mind was still reeling, and his stomach churned with anxiety. But something inside him refused to let go. He needed to know more. He couldn't just walk away from this. I don't understand, he muttered, his voice trembling. I've worked so hard for everything I have. How could this condition, this manipulation, be part of something I didn't choose? Sarah's gaze softened for a moment, almost as if she understood his frustration. It's not about what you chose, John. It's about what's been chosen for you. And what you do next will determine the future. Your future. Your legacy. John stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't sit still any longer. The weight of the conversation, of the unknown, was too much to bear. What happens next? Sarah stood too, her gaze never leaving his. You'll have to trust me. You'll need to prepare yourself for what's coming. The world you know is about to change. And you, John, will be at the center of it. John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His mind was spinning, but the uncertainty in Sarah's eyes told him one thing: she wasn't lying. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, he had become a part of it. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "I'll trust you. But you better make sure you're telling me everything. I won't be kept in the dark." Sarah nodded, a faint smile curling on her lips. "I'm telling you everything you need to know. But the rest will come in time." John took one last look at her before turning to leave. As he stepped out of the warehouse and into the cold night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew about his life was crumbling around him. The truth was coming. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were a blur for John. His life had shifted from the comfortable routine he had known to a never-ending cycle of questions and confusion. It was like waking up in a different world, one where the rules didn't make sense anymore. And through it all, Sarah remained a constant presence, but her words were haunting him more than they were helping. John couldn't shake the image of Sarah's eyes, the way she'd spoken about the forces pulling the strings behind his life, the manipulation of his bloodline. It all seemed too much to process. Everything he had worked for, all the plans he had for his future, was it all part of some grand scheme he had never asked for? He hadn't heard from her in the past few days, and part of him was relieved. But the other part, the part that wanted answers, the part that knew he couldn't run away from the truth forever, was growing restless. He needed to understand more, to peel back the layers of mystery surrounding his condition. He spent the next morning pacing around his penthouse apartment, the silence weighing on him like a 1,000-pound boulder. The sleek, modern furniture that once made him feel like he had control of his world now felt cold and distant. It was as if nothing belonged to him anymore. He had lost his grip on reality. Then, his phone buzzed. John snatched it up eagerly, almost desperate for some sort of direction. The text was from Sarah, and he hadn't expected to hear from her so soon. He clicked on the message, his heart pounding in his chest. "Meet me at the old warehouse tonight. There's something you need to see." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. John's palms became sweaty. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever she was about to reveal, but he knew he had no choice. He had to face it. That night, he found himself back at the warehouse. The shadows seemed darker, more foreboding than before, and the air smelled thick with the remnants of dust and neglect. The place felt less like a building and more like a tomb, silent, forgotten, and heavy with secrets. But it was here that his answers would lie. And he would face them, no matter how terrifying they might be. As John walked through the narrow corridor leading into the main room, he saw Sarah waiting by the same wooden table. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable. There was no warmth, no comforting smile, only a quiet, calculating presence. "John," she greeted him, her voice low and steady. "You came." "I came because you said there was something I needed to see," he replied, his voice tight with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Sit down," Sarah instructed, gesturing toward the chair across from her. He sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken tension. Then, without warning, Sarah stood up and walked toward the far side of the room. John watched her carefully, trying to make sense of what was going on. She turned, her eyes focused on him as she began speaking again. "Do you remember the first time we met, John?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "You didn't believe me. You thought I was some stranger trying to mess with your life. But now, I think you understand that everything I said was true." John felt a lump form in his throat. He had believed her then, at least partially, but the gravity of what she was telling him now was overwhelming. She had spoken of a larger plan, of forces watching him, of a future he was being dragged into. But what was the truth behind it all? And how much of it had he been living without even knowing? Yeah, I remember, John said, his voice strained. I didn't believe you. But now, I don't know what to believe anymore. Exactly, Sarah said, nodding in agreement. You don't know what to believe, because the truth is far stranger than you think. John's pulse quickened as he leaned forward. What do you mean? Sarah took a deep breath, then spoke slowly, each word weighted with significance. The condition you've been diagnosed with, asthenospermia, wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random genetic mutation. It was something planned, John. You were always meant to be part of this. John's heart skipped a beat. Planned? By who? Why? I've been telling you that there are forces at play here, she continued, her tone growing more serious. You think your condition is the end of your legacy, but it's actually the beginning of something much larger. A plan that's been in motion for decades. John felt a chill run down his spine. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I were, Sarah said, her voice growing softer. But the truth is far more complicated than you can imagine. And the longer you deny it, the more danger you'll put yourself in. Because you're part of something bigger than just your family. Your bloodline is key to the future. John shook his head, trying to make sense of the absurdity of it all. You're saying this is all part of some bigger plan? But why me? Why me, of all people? Because you're special, John. Your lineage has been chosen. Your family, your genetics, they're part of a long-standing legacy. And your condition, though it may seem like a curse, is actually the catalyst for something far greater. I don't understand. How can something like this be part of a plan? How does my inability to have children fit into this legacy you keep talking about? That's where the truth gets complicated, Sarah said, her voice tightening. The condition you have, it's not just about infertility. It's about control. Someone has been manipulating your family for years, using your bloodline as a way to control something much bigger. Something that will change the world. John stared at her, struggling to comprehend the enormity of her words. What could possibly be more important than that? What could my family have to do with changing the world? That's what I'm here to show you, Sarah said, moving toward the back of the room. She pressed a hidden panel in the wall, and suddenly, a large screen flickered to life. The room seemed to hum with energy as images began to flash on the screen, old documents, photos, and videos from decades ago. John's breath caught in his throat as he saw images of his grandfather, a man he had always admired, standing next to powerful figures he didn't recognize. There were cryptic symbols, strange diagrams, and discussions that seemed to be about something far more secretive than he had ever known. The images seemed to swirl around him, and for the first time, John felt like he was staring into the heart of something deeply hidden, something he was meant to be a part of. What is this? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. These are the records of your family, John. This is what they've been hiding from you. Your grandfather was a key player in a global organization, an organization that has been shaping world events for decades. Your family's bloodline is at the center of a secret legacy, and your condition, though devastating in some ways, is part of the plan that's been set in motion. John's mind was racing. His grandfather? A key player in some secret organization? This couldn't be real. He had always known his family was well connected, but this was something else entirely. What does this have to do with me? John asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah turned to him, her eyes steady and focused. It has everything to do with you, John. You were chosen. Your bloodline has been carefully curated for this purpose. And now, the time has come for you to take your place. The forces that have been working in the shadows are preparing for a shift. A change in power. And you, whether you like it or not, are at the center of it all. John sat back in his chair, his thoughts a blur. He had come here looking for answers, but all he had found was more confusion. His family's legacy, his diagnosis, and the future, it was all tied up in ways he couldn't begin to understand. "You're telling me I'm supposed to be part of some scheme? Some plan that's been in the works for decades?" John's voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm not telling you that you have to be part of it, John," Sarah replied, her tone softer. "I'm telling you that you are part of it. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" John was silent for a long time. He had never felt more powerless, more unsure of his place in the world. Everything he had known, everything he had worked for, now felt meaningless. The truth he had uncovered was like a heavy weight, crushing him beneath its weight. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, John spoke. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I just want answers. I want to know what happens next." Sarah looked at him, her gaze steady, almost sad. "You'll find the answers soon enough, John. But be careful. What comes next will change everything. Your world, your legacy, nothing will be the same once you know the truth." The room fell silent as the weight of her words hung in the air. John knew that nothing would ever be the same again. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The truth was just beginning to unfold. And John had no idea what would happen next. The days after meeting Sarah were nothing short of surreal. John couldn't shake the feeling that his life had been torn from its axis and sent spinning into a new, uncharted realm. He couldn't go back to the way things were. That much was clear. But the new path he was being asked to walk. It felt like a road paved with questions and uncertainty, with no clear answers in sight. The warehouse meeting had left him reeling. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, rattling him to his core. "You were chosen." Those words haunted him. What did it mean? What could it mean? And why was his family, his grandfather, specifically, tied to this vast, shadowy organization? He couldn't even begin to make sense of it. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he actually knew about his own history. In the days following the warehouse meeting, John had tried to reach out to his family, his mother, his father, anyone who might be able to shed light on this madness. But no one would answer. Every attempt was met with silence. It was like they were avoiding him, like they knew something he didn't. Or maybe they were part of it all, too. He had no idea. His thoughts were interrupted one evening when a strange visitor arrived at his door. John opened the door cautiously, not sure what to expect. But standing in front of him was someone he had never seen before, tall, dressed in a black suit, with an air of mystery that made John's stomach churn. "Are you John Mercer?" the man asked, his voice deep and steady. John eyed him suspiciously. "Yeah, I'm John. Who are you?" "I'm here on behalf of a mutual acquaintance," the man said cryptically. "Sarah sent me." John's stomach turned at the mention of Sarah. What now? He wasn't sure if he was ready for another round of cryptic messages or confusing revelations, but something told him he had no choice but to listen. He stepped aside and gestured for the man to come in. "Sit," John said, pointing to the sofa in his living room. "What is this about?" The man took a seat, his expression unreadable. He looked calm, but there was something in his eyes that made John's nerves flare. This wasn't just some casual meeting. Something big was coming, and John had no idea what it was. "Sarah told me you're starting to understand the gravity of your situation," the man said, his voice steady and deliberate. "She also said you have questions. Questions that need answers." John's eyes narrowed. "What kind of answers?" "Answers about who you are. Answers about your legacy. Answers about what comes next," the man replied. John felt a sharp pang in his chest. "I don't know if I can take any more cryptic answers." "What are you talking about?" The man remained calm. "It's not my place to explain everything to you right now. But I can tell you this the situation you find yourself in is not just about your health. It's not about your family's wealth. It's about something much larger, something far beyond your understanding. But you're already a part of it. You have been since the day you were born. John's breath caught in his throat. The man's words struck a chord deep within him. His head was swimming with possibilities, each one darker and more mysterious than the last. "What do you want from me?" John asked, his voice shaking slightly. "What is this larger thing you keep referring to?" The man paused, his gaze unwavering. "I can't tell you everything right now. But I can tell you that you're not alone. There are others like you. People who have been chosen, people who are integral to the next phase of this plan. And the time has come for you to make a choice." "A choice?" John echoed, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What choice? What's happening?" The man leaned forward, his eyes locking with John's. "You can choose to walk away. Ignore all of this. Go back to your life, live it the way you always have. But know this, if you choose that path, you will never know the full truth. You will never understand what your family's role really is. And you will never understand what the future holds." John's heart raced in his chest. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. "And the other choice?" "The other choice is to take control of your destiny. Embrace the truth. Step into the role that has been prepared for you. Your family's legacy is powerful, John. It's been guiding world events for generations. The question is, will you step up to claim your place?" John sat back, stunned. His mind was spinning, and his heart was pounding in his chest. Was he really being asked to make this decision? Was he supposed to accept this strange, terrifying new reality, or walk away and pretend none of it was true? Could he just leave it all behind? But how could he walk away from the truth? How could he live with himself, knowing that there were pieces to the puzzle that he didn't even know existed? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what it all means. How can I just step into this role you're talking about?" The man's gaze softened, just slightly. "You're already stepping into it, whether you realize it or not. Your condition, the legacy of your family, it's all part of something bigger. But the choice is yours. You can ignore it, or you can take your place in a world that few even know exists. The world you're part of is more powerful than you can imagine. But with that power comes responsibility." John felt a chill spread through him. He had always thought his life was just like anyone else's. But now, everything was changing. His family's legacy, his diagnosis, and the future, none of it felt like his own anymore. "I'll need time to think," John said, standing up. He didn't know if he was ready to make this kind of decision, but he knew one thing: he had to think carefully. The stakes were too high. The man stood as well, his expression unreadable. "Time is something you don't have much of, John. But I understand. Think about it. But don't take too long." With that, the man turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving John standing there, his mind a swirl of conflicting thoughts and emotions. That night, John couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision was like a dark cloud hanging over him. He sat at his desk, staring out the window at the city lights below. The world was still the same, but his place in it felt so distant, so uncertain. He had always been in control, always knew where he was headed. But now? Everything felt out of reach. It wasn't just his condition anymore. It wasn't just about his family's secrets. It was about the future, about the power and responsibility that came with the truth. But was he ready for that? John's mind flashed back to his grandfather, the man who had always been a pillar of strength and success in his life. But now, John wondered if he had ever truly known his grandfather. Was the man he had idolized really just a part of a larger, more dangerous game? Or had he been deceived, just like John had been? The phone buzzed, snapping John from his thoughts. He grabbed it, hoping for some distraction, anything to pull him out of the swirling mess of uncertainty. It was a text from Sarah. "You've made your choice, haven't you?" John's finger hovered over the screen. What did she mean? How could she know what choice he was about to make? He didn't even know himself. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. Whether he liked it or not, his future was already set in motion. The only question left was, what role would he play in it? John didn't sleep that night. The heavy weight of the decision he was about to make kept him awake, tossing and turning, replaying every conversation, every cryptic warning he had received. He kept coming back to one question: what was the truth? The knock on his door came just after dawn. At first, John thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe the lack of sleep was finally catching up to him. But no, it was real. The sharp knock echoed through his apartment, breaking the silence that had been holding him captive. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected anyone, at least not this early. John hesitated for a moment, then stood up, feeling the stiff tension in his legs. He walked cautiously toward the door. Looking through the peephole. A familiar face greeted him, Sarah. His stomach dropped. What was she doing here? And why now, when everything felt like it was spiraling out of control? He opened the door. "Sarah," John said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "What are you doing here?" She stood there, calm but serious. Her eyes were intense, focused, and there was something about her presence that felt like it demanded an answer, a response. She wasn't here for small talk. "I'm here to help you," she said, her voice steady. "But only if you're ready to listen. You've made your choice, John. And it's time for you to understand what that means." John's mind raced. Had she been reading his thoughts? Was she somehow aware of the turmoil he was feeling? How could she know that he hadn't fully decided yet? "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," John admitted, stepping aside to let her in. "I feel like I'm drowning in all these secrets, these lies. I don't know who to trust anymore." Sarah walked in without hesitation, her expression unwavering. She sat down on the couch and waited for him to do the same. When he didn't immediately sit, she continued. "You don't have to trust anyone right now," she said. "Not me. Not the people you've been meeting. Not even your own family. But you do need to understand something." John finally took a seat, still feeling disoriented by everything that had happened in the last few days. "What's that?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Your family's legacy," Sarah began, "isn't just about power or wealth. It's about influence, on a scale you can't even imagine. The Mercer family has been connected to the world's most powerful organizations for generations, and not just in business. There are ties to governments, covert organizations, and yes, science." John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had always known that his family's wealth and connections had placed them in high places. But what Sarah was saying now was something different. It was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "What do you mean, science?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your family," Sarah said, "has been part of something much bigger than just business. There's a reason why your grandfather was so influential. A reason why he was so careful about the things he allowed you to see. He knew what was coming, John. He knew what you would need to prepare for." John's heart raced. "What are you talking about? What's coming?" Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, it was with a deep sense of urgency. "The world is changing, and not in the way you think. There's a revolution coming, one that will rewrite everything we know about the human race. And your family has been at the center of it for years. Your grandfather was one of the key players in this revolution, and now, you are, too." John felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath him had just shifted. "A revolution?" he repeated, his mind unable to process the words. I'm just a businessman, Sarah. What could I possibly have to do with this? She looked at him with a knowing expression, her eyes piercing into his. You're not just a businessman, John. You never were. Your role was set long before you even realized it. You've always been part of something bigger. Part of what? John demanded. What do you mean? What's really going on? Your family's involvement in the global elite is just the surface, Sarah said. There's something deeper, something that goes beyond money and influence. Your grandfather, the people he worked with, they've all been involved in an underground scientific movement for years. And now, it's your turn to take the reins. John's mind swirled. He couldn't make sense of it. What do you mean, scientific movement? And why me? Why now? Because of the diagnosis, Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. The truth is, John, you were never meant to live a normal life. You were never meant to take over your family's business the way you thought. The doctor's diagnosis wasn't just some fluke. It was part of a plan to transform you into something else. John felt his blood run cold. The doctor's diagnosis, he had always thought it was a curse. But now, Sarah was telling him it was part of a much larger design. I don't understand, he said, his voice hoarse. What do you mean, transform me? How? There's more to you than you think, John, Sarah said. Your DNA, your genetic makeup, has been altered. The condition you have, it's not something that happens by chance. It was engineered. And now, you're in the perfect position to understand what that means. You're part of a project that's been in the works for generations. And you're about to play a pivotal role in it. John's breath caught in his throat. He felt like the ground had just been pulled out from under him. My DNA? What do you mean, altered? Who did this to me? Sarah's eyes softened, but there was no denying the gravity of her words. Your grandfather was part of a secret organization, an underground network of scientists, geneticists, and thinkers who were trying to change the very fabric of human evolution. They wanted to push humanity to the next level. They believed that human beings had the potential for far more than we realized. And they were right. John could barely breathe. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't make sense. And I'm part of this experiment? He asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah nodded. You're not just a part of it, John. You're the next step. Your condition is not a curse, it's a key. It's the final piece that will unlock the next stage of human evolution. John leaned back in his chair, stunned into silence. The revelations were coming faster than he could process them. His mind was reeling, trying to keep up, but it felt impossible. His life, the life he had known, had just been turned upside down. Nothing was the same anymore. Sarah, I don't know what to think, John said, running his hands through his hair. I feel like I'm losing my mind. This is too much. I can't just accept all of this, not without understanding more. I need more answers. Sarah stood up, her expression resolute. I understand. And I'll help you get them. But you have to make a choice, John. You can either stay in the dark and walk away from all of this, or you can embrace it. Embrace who you are meant to be. But you can't do both. Not anymore. John looked at her, his mind spinning. He was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. But was he ready to take the plunge? He didn't know. All he knew was that his world had just shifted, and there was no going back. The question was, what would he do next? John sat in the dimly lit apartment, staring at the small table in front of him. The weight of the decision he had to make pressed down on his chest like a physical force, making each breath feel labored. The world he had once known was now a shadow, a far-off, comforting memory of normalcy that felt increasingly out of reach. What Sarah had just told him about his family's involvement in a covert scientific movement, the manipulation of his very DNA, and the future that was seemingly already written for him, was impossible to wrap his mind around. His phone sat on the table next to him, its screen glowing in the quiet room. The text from Sarah earlier still lingered in his thoughts. "You've made your choice, haven't you?" The irony wasn't lost on him. He had barely even begun to make sense of this chaotic new world, and yet, he was already being asked to choose which path to follow. His mind raced with the potential consequences. If what Sarah said was true, everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, and even his identity had been built on lies. But could he really accept that? Could he take a step into the unknown and embrace this new reality? A knock on the door startled him. John's heart jumped in his chest. He had half expected another visitor, someone else from the network Sarah had mentioned. But it still felt jarring, like the world was forcing him to confront the truth he was trying to avoid. He opened the door cautiously, his pulse quickening as he saw who stood on the other side. It was Sarah again. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped past him into the apartment, her presence once again filling the space with the weight of impending decisions. John wasn't sure whether to be angry, confused, or relieved that she had come back. But there was no time for any of those emotions. She was here now, and that meant things were about to change again. "Sarah, he began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "I know," she said. "You have questions. You're confused. You don't know what to believe. But you need to understand something." She took a deep breath and turned to face him. "What I've told you so far, about your family, your condition, the revolution, it's only the beginning. You're standing at the edge of something enormous. You've always been part of something enormous, whether you knew it or not. But now, it's time for you to decide, do you want to stay on the sidelines, or do you want to step into your true role?" John felt his chest tighten. The pressure of the moment was suffocating. There were too many unknowns, too many pieces to this puzzle he didn't have. How could he possibly make such a monumental decision when his entire world was spinning out of control? "I don't know if I can do this," John said, shaking his head. "You're asking me to just accept all of this. To embrace it. But how do I know it's real? How do I know what you're telling me isn't just another layer of deception?" Sarah's expression softened. She understood his hesitation. How could she not? This wasn't an easy thing to accept, and it wasn't something he could just leap into without fear or doubt. But she knew that time was running out. And so did he. "I get it, John," she said gently. "This isn't easy. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. But I am asking you to consider something." John frowned. "What?" Sarah looked him square in the eyes, her voice firm. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that you were never meant to live the life you've been living. Your family, your grandfather, he set all of this in motion. It's not just about power, or control, or money. It's about evolution. It's about humanity's next step. And you? You're the key." John felt a rush of anger rise in his chest. "So that's it? I'm just a pawn in some grand experiment?" His voice shook with frustration. "What if I don't want to be the key? What if I don't want any part of this revolution?" Sarah's eyes hardened. "You think you have a choice, don't you?" Her words were sharp, but they held a truth that cut through John like a blade. "The truth is, you've never had a choice. Not really. The path you're on was set before you were even born. The only question is whether or not you'll choose to walk it. And believe me, John, there's no going back once you've stepped onto this path." John ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of her words. "But why me? Why was I chosen? What makes me different from anyone else?" Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's not about being different. It's about what you represent. The condition you have, it's not just a fluke of nature. It's a genetic anomaly. Something that your family was trying to achieve. Something that could change everything for humanity. It's why they've kept you in the dark for so long. You were always meant for this. John shook his head, overwhelmed. But what if I don't want to change the world? What if I just want to live a normal life? You can't, Sarah replied softly. You were never meant to have a normal life. Not now. Not after everything that's happened. And the world you thought you knew? It doesn't exist anymore. The future is waiting for you to take it. But if you refuse to accept your role, the consequences will be dire. Consequences? John echoed, his mind swirling. What do you mean? The forces that have been working behind the scenes, the ones who've orchestrated all of this, they won't stop just because you say, no, there's too much at stake. You can either stand with them, or against them. But either way, you'll have to make a choice. And soon. John stepped back, his heart pounding. He wanted to scream, to reject everything she was saying. But deep down, he knew she was right. There was no turning back. The world had changed, and so had he. The questions now were not about whether he could go back to his old life, but about what kind of future he would shape. I don't know if I can do this, John whispered, his voice heavy with doubt. I'm not asking you to know everything right now, Sarah said. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to take the first step. John stood still for a moment, the silence between them thick and charged with anticipation. He felt trapped, caught between two versions of his life, the one he had always known, and the one Sarah was offering him. Could he really walk away from everything he had worked for? Could he abandon his old identity for this new, dangerous path? Why did you come here? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why not just let me figure this out on my own? I came here because you need to understand the stakes, Sarah replied, her voice low and urgent. You need to understand that this isn't just about you anymore. It's about the world. It's about the future. And you're in the middle of it. You're not just some observer. You're part of something that will change everything. Whether you accept it or not. John's mind was reeling. So what's the next step? Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again. The next step is to meet the others. John froze. Others? Sarah nodded. There are others like you, John. People who've been chosen. People who understand what's at stake. And they're waiting for you. John felt a pang of fear in his chest. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for sure, there was no way out. No matter how much he resisted, the truth was undeniable. His future was already written. All he had to do was take the first step. I don't know what's going to happen, Sarah, John said quietly, looking her in the eye. But I'll go. I'll see what's next. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Good. The choice has been made. Now it's time to see what you're really capable of. John turned away from her, his mind spinning. The room felt smaller, more suffocating with each passing second. But there was no denying the truth any longer. His life, the one he thought he knew, was gone. It was time to embrace the new one. No matter the cost. As he followed Sarah out the door, John couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the car felt thick with anticipation as John stared out the window. The city outside had never seemed more distant, more alien. It was like he was watching it through a veil, a world that no longer belonged to him. Sarah sat beside him, her silence hanging heavy in the confined space. He couldn't tell if she was waiting for him to speak or if she, too, was lost in her thoughts. Either way, there was a tension between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that this journey, whatever it would bring, was one they couldn't turn back from. For the past hour, they had driven through increasingly unfamiliar streets. The familiar hum of the city had given way to the more industrial areas on the outskirts. John had no idea where they were going, but it didn't matter. Every mile they covered seemed to pull him further away from his old life and deeper into whatever future Sarah had promised him. "Where are we going?" John asked finally, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. Sarah turned to him, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. "To meet the others," she said simply. "The ones who understand." John felt his heart rate quicken at her words. The others had been nothing more than an abstract concept up until now. He had heard about them from Sarah, people who had been part of this covert movement for years, people who shared his genetic condition, people who had the knowledge he needed to understand what was happening to him. But it was one thing to hear about them and another entirely to meet them in person. The car turned onto a narrow, unmarked road that twisted between tall trees, the heavy branches blocking out the sun. John looked around, his mind racing. Everything about this situation felt wrong. He didn't belong here, and yet, there was a nagging pull in his chest, a feeling that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. "You said I was the key," John said after a long pause, his voice filled with disbelief. "What does that mean? What am I supposed to do?" Sarah glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You'll understand soon enough. But for now, just know this, you're not alone in this. There are people who've walked this path before you. People who have already made the choice to accept their role. And if I choose not to accept it?" John asked. His voice was low, almost to himself. The question had been plaguing him ever since Sarah's cryptic words. "What happens then?" Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened, and she glanced at him with a sharp look. "You've already chosen, John. Your path was chosen before you even knew it. You can't walk away from this now." John swallowed, the reality of her words settling in. There was no turning back. No matter how much he wanted to fight it, no matter how much he wanted to live the life he had always imagined for himself, the truth was inescapable. This was who he was now. And no matter how hard he tried to deny it, he had to face it. The car slowed as they approached a large, iron gate. It was hidden behind a wall of overgrown ivy, almost as if it was meant to be invisible to anyone who wasn't supposed to see it. The gate opened slowly, its hinges creaking in the silence, and they drove inside. The compound was nothing like John had imagined. From the outside, it looked like a fortress, a sprawling estate hidden deep in the woods, its stone buildings covered in moss and ivy, the kind of place that seemed to have been forgotten by time. But as they pulled up to the main building, John realized there was nothing abandoned about it. This was a place of purpose, a place where the future was being shaped, where people like him were being molded into something different. As Sarah parked the car, John felt a sudden surge of anxiety. He didn't know what to expect, what kind of people would be waiting for him behind those walls. Would they be like Sarah, calm, composed, seemingly in control of everything? Or would they be different? Would they be like him, confused, struggling to make sense of it all? He followed Sarah into the building, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes John couldn't even begin to comprehend. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something more metallic, like the hum of machinery just beyond his reach. It was a sterile, impersonal place, and yet, there was a strange energy here. A quiet, pulsing force that seemed to vibrate in the very air they breathed. They stopped in front of a door, and Sarah turned to look at him. "This is it," she said softly. "Are you ready?" John felt his heart race. He wasn't ready. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready for whatever awaited him on the other side of that door. But he knew that he had no choice. This was his future, whether he liked it or not. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," he said honestly, "but I have to face it." With that, Sarah opened the door and stepped inside. The room was large, circular, and dimly lit. There were several people inside, 5, to be exact. All of them were standing in a loose circle, their eyes trained on Sarah as she entered the room with John in tow. They didn't seem surprised to see him, as if they had been expecting him all along. Sarah gestured to one of the individuals, a tall, thin man with sharp features and a stern expression. "This is Alexander," she said. "He's the leader of this group, the one who understands the science behind everything you've been told." John stepped forward, feeling a strange mix of awe and apprehension. "You know what's happening to me?" he asked. Alexander nodded, his piercing blue eyes never leaving John's. "We all do," he replied in a voice that was low and steady. "We've all been through it." John glanced around the room, at the other people who were watching him with the same steady gaze. There was something about them, something in their eyes, that made him realize they were different. They weren't just people. They were something more. Something evolved. A woman standing near the back stepped forward, her long black hair falling in waves around her shoulders. "You're not alone, John," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "We've all made the same choice you're about to make. And we're here to help you understand what it means." John felt a knot form in his stomach. "What is it you want me to understand?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You have a unique opportunity, John," Alexander said. "You are the next step in human evolution. Your condition, the one that doctors diagnosed as a flaw, it's actually a key. A key that unlocks the potential for something more. Something greater." John stared at him, trying to grasp the magnitude of his words. "You're saying this is part of the plan? That I was chosen for this?" "Yes," Alexander answered, his gaze unwavering. "You were always meant for this. Your family knew it. That's why they kept you in the dark for so long. But now, the time has come for you to embrace your role." Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and filled with conviction. "What we're doing here isn't just about changing one life. It's about changing the future of humanity. We're not trying to make you into something you're not, John. We're helping you become the person you were always meant to be." John's head was spinning. The words were overwhelming, but they made a strange kind of sense. He had felt it all along, this gnawing sense that there was more to his life than he had ever known. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for, even if he hadn't understood it until now. He looked around the room at the people who were watching him, waiting for him to make his choice. They were all so calm, so assured. They had accepted this path, this destiny. Could he do the same? "I don't know if I can do this," John whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "You don't have to do it alone," the woman with black hair said. "We're here to help you. But you have to take the first step. The future is waiting for you, John." The room grew quiet as the weight of those words sank in. John felt his breath catch in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been avoiding, the moment that would define the rest of his life. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his voice steady as he spoke. "I'm ready."